I'm Kirk Harnack. On This Week in Radio Tech, I'm joined by Chris Tobin and Chris Tarr. We're playing Stump the Chumps with the radio engineering fanatics in the chat room. Twert is up next.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is This Week in Radio Tech, episode 98, recorded September 7th, 2011. Stump the Chumps. This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Axia Audio and the new Radius IP audio console. Feature-rich, affordable IP audio consoles on the web at axiaaudio.com. Plus, check out some of the 2,200 Axia IP audio studios worldwide at clients.axiaaudio.com. It's time for This Week in Radio Tech. Hello there. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host. Yeah, you've tuned into the show where we talk about, well, of course, radio technology, and that really includes a lot of stuff. You know, hey, if this were 1980, we'd be talking about everything from the stylus on the turntable through the Optimod 8000 and on into the the RCA transmitter, the BTF 20E transmitter. So, but things are a little bit different now. We've not so many turntable styli laying around radio stations. We've got a lot of computers. We still have microphones to deal with, like this one, that's Heil PR40. We still have audio consoles, so they're totally digital and not so much analog consoles anymore. And a lot of them are IP consoles. And we have audio processing that now is basically a computer that's doing audio processing. Instead of so much DSP chips, we have boxes running various flavors of Linux and Windows and who knows what, doing our audio processing. And hey, if you're an HD radio station, you know that your transmitter is basically a computer that transmits audio, so it transmits RF and does the modulation. So technology's taken us a long way. And that's what we're talking about now. So let's bring in our other co-hosts. I'm Kirk. I started the show, and I work for the folks at Telos Omni and Axia, and I've been a broadcast engineer for, oh my goodness, 30 years now. Let's bring in Chris Tobin from New York City, the best-dressed engineer in radio. Hey, Chris, how are you?
Hello, Kirk. How are you? All's well, I hope.
I'm great. Your lower third says you're with CBS Radio, but I think you're actually changing jobs at this point.
Yes, actually, I probably should have sent something just as a reminder. Yeah, I've left the folks at CBS to move on to bigger adventures, and that is as president of Musicam USA, and it's a codec company that does IP audio and video, and that's for full disclosure for everybody. But I, too, have many years of experience in broadcast engineering, probably around 25 and change, and so that's where things stand at the moment.
And another co-host with us is from Mukwonago, Wisconsin. It's Mr. Chris Tarr, the not always as best-dressed engineer in radio. Hey, Chris.
Well, you know what? Out here in the back 40, we don't need to dress like that. You fancy boys from Nashville and New York City, we're not like that out here.
Oh, Chris, you're always great just to keep us back in reality. You're doing engineering there up in the great Midwest.
I am the director of engineering for Intercom's radio stations in Madison and Milwaukee. I also am a contributing columnist to Radio Guide magazine. And, let's see what else. Lots of things.
Chris and I were chatting on, was it on the Twitter or on the Facebook the other day about a new little pastime you have having to do with bubbly water.
Oh, my Sodastream. This thing is awesome. Here, I'm going to show this. And if you're watching Sodastream, send me lots of free stuff because I love your stuff. I bought one of those Sodastream machines. It comes with the CO2 canister, and then you just pour water into the bottle, and you fizz it up, and you can put all kinds of stuff in there. It is the coolest thing. It is such a low-tech thing that I'm surprised that I love it so. There's no electricity in it. So, I mean, it's almost way too simple for my lifestyle, but In fact, if they could maybe make it a little more complicated, I'd appreciate it. But this thing is awesome. Right now I'm drinking lemon lime fizzy water. It's awesome.
So this soda, I was looking at the website for Sodastream, because you mentioned this on the Twitter or something, and I thought, well, I got to look that up. It's kind of cool. They have the most beautiful website with great video and all kinds of flashy hoo and stuff that explains a lot about how this thing works. And yet I still have questions. Hey, I like soda as much as anybody. So this, you take ordinary water and it puts carbonation in it?
Yeah, you take this bottle and they've got, they give you a couple of these bottles and you fill it up with just regular water, and then you put it in the machine and it seals it up, and then you hit the CO2 button a couple of times and it carbonates the water. You take it all apart and you put in flavorings. You can buy these different syrups and everything, but the syrups that they sell are a lot better, healthy wise as opposed to soda. There's like 8 grams of sugar in a 1 liter serving, or not in a 1 liter, but in a 12-ounce serving of the stuff, and it's a lot less expensive. The CO2 cartridge is a little spendy because once it empties, you've got to take it in and get it replaced, and I think it's $15 to replace the CO2 cartridge.
But
so
other than that, this doesn't use a little CO2 cartridge that's like you put in a pot in a cap.
It's a pretty large one, and it'll do, I believe, at least 60 of these 1 liter bottles per cartridge, and that's $15. And then if you want to buy the syrup, which does many bottles, I think that's like $4. But still, if you price it down, it's something along the lines of 60 cents a liter or something to make it, and it tastes awesome. So yeah, I've only had it a few days and I'm hooked.
When you buy one, does it come with a fully charged CO2?
Yep, they have the starter kit, and it comes with a couple of bottles and the CO2 and a sampler pack that has a whole bunch of different flavors to it. So you can get started right away and start making soda right away. And you can do soda. They've got diet and regular. I went and put some lemon lime flavoring into just regular carbonated water, and beats how much I'm paying for my LaCroix. So it's fascinating. The kids love it. It's a lot of fun, charging the bottle up with CO2 and putting the flavorings in. But there are people who make their own flavorings and all that kind of stuff. So it's just I just happened, a friend of mine had one and highly recommended it, and so I went and picked one up. And I'm hooked. I love it. It's a lot of fun.
Okay, so the CO2 is kind of expensive. There's a couple different models of this thing available. It's the show, by the way, is This Week in Carbonated Water Technology. I'm fascinated by this.
It's kind of a geek thing, it really is.
Yeah. In my household, we spend very little on carbonated drinks. I grew up without much carbonated drinks, but we love them. And in fact, a couple of years ago, there was a video that kind of went a little bit viral on YouTube, and it was a 10-minute little thing about this store in Los Angeles called Soda Pop Stop. I think the website's sodapopstop.com. And my wife went bananas. My wife bought $200 of vintage soda pop. So we're still going through the Moxie and the the carbonated espresso and all the other crazy flavors that she bought, and some real Coca-Cola made with sugar, not with the high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah, see, and that's the syrups that you can buy for this. The mixes contain both sugar, has some sugar and some Splenda, and not they don't use the fructose corn syrup. So yeah, it tastes it's really good. And like I said, what's really neat about it is you can make these 1 liter bottles, and I've got 4 of these that I just kind of rotate around and have different flavors for different people in the family, and it tastes a lot better, and it's a lot cheaper than, we drink a lot of it here, so we would buy a couple of 12 packs a week of soda. This is much cheaper. So, and like I said, it's kind of geeky, and it's a good conversation piece when you're talking to somebody and you're making a liter bottle of soda, as you're talking to them. It's kind of fun.
I think the chat room's implying that I'm 15 years late in discovering this. Chris Tobin, you guys use a soda pop, one of these soda streams at your house?
I don't have it at the house, but we did have them as a client at 2 of the radio stations, and it was Sodastream throughout the studios, both consumed and sometimes found inside the consoles. But that was good stuff. Well, we have very talented morning show hosts on the sports station, and they're very active and like to engage the audience and demonstrating the new product. And as for the sponsor, it got a little messy. But it was very tasty, I have to say, and it wasn't as destructive as it could have been. But it's good stuff. I like it.
Can you use any gases other than CO2? Like, could I use helium?
Well, I don't know. Maybe you should try it.
But might make your voice sound funny, huh?
Maybe you should try some hydrogen and see what happens.
Sounds like it could be dangerous.
Argon.
Have you tried carbonating any liquids besides water with the syrup, like milk?
They tell you to avoid that because
Really?
it'll make sense. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Here's now. Speaking of, this is getting somewhere. You know, last week I mentioned that I would probably be doing this episode from Amsterdam because the IBC convention is starting in Amsterdam on Friday, and I'm supposed to go to that. And it turns out that because of scheduling and all kinds of stuff that I had to do here, I'm actually leaving tomorrow. So I'm going to try to sleep on the flight overnight going to Europe, and then I'll fly into Amsterdam and work all that first day. Well, I won't get a day of rest or a day to try to adjust to the time zone there. I'll just get there Friday morning and go to work Friday morning at the IBC show. Well, this reminded me that in Amsterdam, and maybe this is true in other places in Europe, that if in Amsterdam, if you go to McDonald's or another popular restaurant and you order up an iced tea, it will be carbonated, which is just, to a Southern American, is just the grossest thing around. A carbonated, unsweetened, or maybe it is sweetened, but either way, a carbonated iced tea is just weird.
Well, that's just like when I go down south and order an iced tea and it's sweetened. That's just weird too.
Yeah, we do love our sweet tea. I try to drink unsweet tea, but sometimes the whole family goes into McDonald's and gets a Mickey D's sweet tea, and I've got to play along. So. And
overseas it's not a quarter pounder because they're on the metric system. It's a Royale with cheese. I remember John Travolta talking about that in Pulp Fiction.
That's right. Hey, one time I went to the McDonald's in Prague, Czech Republic, right there at the big town square thing, whatever it's called. And I should know the name of it. I can't believe I'm forgetting it. But this, I went there and I ordered the country burger. The country. I thought, well, this will be interesting. A country burger. Maybe it has some local flavor. So I got myself this country burger, and they do charge extra for ketchup there in Czech Republic and a lot of Europe. So I sit down and I open up the country burger and I take a big old bite of the country burger and I think, this just tastes weird. There's something wrong here. And I'm chewing. I'm looking at the country burger and I smell it. And I bite a little bit more and I realize, oh, it's made with sausage. So it's this hamburger made with pork sausage inside. That was weird. Now, once your brain, it's kind of like picking up a glass of a clear liquid and thinking it's Sprite, but it turns out it's something else, or thinking it's water, but it's Sprite. Your brain has to adjust for a second. I wouldn't mind the Sprite. I wouldn't mind the water. My brain just needed to know which one it was.
Sometimes I have a problem with vodka.
All right.
We're proving one thing. It's that engineers know food. That's how, and that's always been the truth for ages.
That is true. All right. Hey, okay, here's our first Stump the Chump question. We're going to have a Stump the Chumps episode here. So we're depending on the chat room. And Chris Tarr, you've got a pencil and paper handy to jot down any questions or some way to capture these. I'm depending on you, sir, because I can't read this.
Keep an eye on it.
The first question is actually for Mr. Tobin. How do they generate the top-of-the-hour CBS News tones that they do on the CBS radio network?
How they generate the tone? It's a tone generator that, what do you call it?
Oh, there you go. It's tone generator. Thanks.
Yeah, that's about it. Tone generator gets it's synchronized with the automation and a GPS clock. That's how they do the tone.
Okay, so there's a GPS clock that syncs the automation system, and the automation system plays the tone.
Right. It's a relay closure. Not the tone by the automation. There's a continuous tone running, a relay closure or a solid-state relay closes, and puts audio across the bus, the automation channels, for the top of the hour for the news.
Okay. You could have maybe just made something up to make it sound at least a little bigger than what it is. Like there's some guy in a big office, and that's his job all day is to press the button at the top of the hour. And
I did that once.
Maybe a cat and is like petting the kitty as he goes over to reach the button or something.
A white cat with a scepter and a bald-headed man with a monocle. Yes.
See, now there you go. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I did that once at a career day, telling people that little story I figured for the students, and I was taken to task after someone found out how I said it.
Here's a question, and this one's a pretty easy one to answer. Is music on FM stations compressed?
Well, it depends on how you mean compressed, right?
Absolutely.
If you mean is it digitally recorded and bit rate reduced, which most people call compression, but I think properly you'd call it bit rate reduction. The answer is probably yes, but not as much as last decade. Years ago, I guess in the mid-'90s, I worked for Scott Studios, which then became DMARC, which then became Google Automation, and is now Wide Orbit. And back when I worked for Scott Studios, hard drive space was more expensive than compression technology, although they both were kind of expensive. In those days, Scott Studios pretty much exclusively used aptX brand of audio bit rate reduction. And they typically got about a 4 to 1 or 5 to 1 reduction in the bit rate, down to about 256 kilobits per second. This was for 15 kilohertz audio, sampled at 32,000 hertz and stereo. And the aptX system is not exactly psychoacoustic. It can just about give you back the same ones and zeros that you started with. There's a slight psychoacoustic component to it, but it's mostly just math, and good math. So aptX always claimed, hey, you can do more coding cycles of aptX than you can with psychoacoustic methods like MPEG Layer 2. I'm not sure if that was actually ever true or not, but anyway, so bottom line is yes. In the 90s, especially the late 90s and throughout the early 2000s, almost all music that you would hear on the radio was bit rate reduced for storage or perhaps for transmission from one place to another. Nowadays, though, storage is so cheap that it doesn't make a lot of sense to bit rate reduce unless you have to run it through a transmission medium that can't handle full bit rate. Like if your studio to transmitter link won't do a couple of megabits per second, or if you're transmitting the audio for some reason from one studio to another over ISDN or over an IP connection. So I'll answer that way. I guess the other way is audio compressed? Well, if by compression you mean is it being processed by an audio compressor and limiter, then yeah, all audio is that way. If we didn't use audio compression and especially audio limiting on AM or FM transmitters, the stations would all be about 10 dB softer on the dial than.
Since we're on that track, let's jump right to Bob. Our friend Bob VE7WNK asks, "How can I get that big market sound a la cheap?" So he's kind of looking for tips on how to make his station sound big on a budget, possibly with used equipment or things that he might find on the on the secondhand market.
Well, what would your answer to that be, Chris?
My answer to that would be there's a lot of ways to do it, but you'd be surprised what you can find relatively inexpensively and, maybe stack the boxes a little bit and get yourself a good sound. For example, I know a lot of people laugh at Behringer. Behringer, however, has some really nice higher-end boxes if you spend some money on them that do multiband compressing and limiting that you can put in front of, for example, some sort of stereo generator that, will get you a pretty decent sound. The 8100s of the early model, even the early model Omnias can be had sometimes relatively inexpensively. And, some of those older boxes still sound really good on the air. Now, you'll never match an Omnia 11 or an Optimod 8500, 8600, but you'll sound good. And, for a couple of $1,000s, in some cases even, you can find a station locally that may have an older, like an Optimod 8000, and, go online and find some old Texar audio prisms or some sort of AGC in front of that. And for a couple $100s, you've put together a pretty decent air chain.
Yep. Good advice. Good advice. I thought I would add to that, and you alluded to this slightly. You really want to start with clean audio, however that may be. Someone in the chat room mentioned, don't some stations get really cheap and buy cheap MP3s? Hey, some radio stations get all their songs from LimeWire and FileDonkey and stuff like that. And I've often told people, look, if you want 12-year-old kids dubbing your music, fine, but I've gone to stations that were complaining about their audio quality and said, well, let's look at your music library first here. Or what we'd often do is take a known commercial, a CD of known good quality, a commercial CD that we knew wasn't all compressed itself, and put it on the air with just it and the audio processor and the transmitter, and lo and behold, the station just sounded great. So we'd have to go look for, okay, where's the problem? Oh, where do you get these MP3s? Well, we get them off LimeWire. Oh, really? And your computers aren't all infected with viruses, right? So I'm not involved so much anymore with acquiring new music for my radio stations. What's the procedure right now? Does DG Systems still send music down that's somewhat compressed? How do stations get their music nowadays? Those who do it right.
I know our stations. There's I wish I could remember the name of the service, but there's an online service where you go and you download the songs. It's sponsored by the record companies, and instead of them sending you CDs, which is what they used to do, they'd send us CDs and we dub them into the system. You can download uncompressed audio of these singles, and then we download them and put them in and that sort of thing. So I definitely know we don't do iTunes, we don't do anything like that, and I can tell you for sure that on my stations I can absolutely tell when they've dubbed in an MP3. Absolutely. I mean, you could have even a fairly high bitrate MP3. I can tell you right away because I spent so much time adjusting the processing on our radio station set to the WAV files that we have, that the minute that they throw something on there that's compressed at all, I can hear it, and it drives me insane.
Chris, what about you, Mr. Tobin?
Well, we get them from the record label services as well, uncompressed. I think for commercials we do compress, but the music we do our best to use uncompressed as best as possible. As you pointed out, the hard drive space is much cheaper now. Years ago, yes, we did compress about 320 kilobits, I believe, was what we did for music, MPEG 2, and then we moved to WAV. And then the commercials, I think we still do compress just to keep it happy with everybody transporting it throughout the company and stuff. But other than that, yeah, and all of our stuff is as pristine as it can be, and we've had a few occasions where people try to bring in something on an MP3, and we're like, yeah, that's not going to happen. As Chris pointed out, if you do it right, you will hear the difference. You definitely will hear the difference.
Yeah, if the audio processing is clean and not smearing the audio itself, then yeah, you will hear the difference. But I got to point something out. And you guys, okay, you may have experienced the same thing that I did, or you may be lying. But when I first heard MP3 at 128 kilobits per second, and the first time I ever heard it, I don't remember if it was either over a Telos Zephyr, or it may have actually been across the Mosley DSP 6000 system. That wasn't MP3, was it? Or was it? Anyway, I heard, I believe, MP3 at 128 kilobits, and the first time I heard it, I thought, wow, I can't tell the difference between this and uncompressed. I really can't hear the difference. And I listened, and I A-B'd for the longest time, and I couldn't hear the difference. Because back then, the distortions that we were accustomed to hearing in audio are not the distortions that you hear with psychoacoustically compressed audio like MP3 or AAC. Is what I'm saying jibing with you?
Yeah, no, that's why aptX cards worked really well in automation systems, because we were feeding them into audio processors that, if you were lucky on a good day, passed 15 kilohertz worth of audio. So, you would never hear these artifacts and these things, and it would sound just fine, because on what you were hearing on the other end really wasn't all that great to begin with. So, and especially if you're accustomed to listening to music off carts or, something like that, if you were to A-B an MP3 file, you'd go, oh, sounds fine to me.
Yeah. Yeah, see, nowadays, it seems like I can hear this quite easily, because my brain knows the artifacts to listen for that psychoacoustically encoded, that is, most of the MPEG type codecs will give you. Although I got to tell you, at a really high bit rate, like AAC at 320 kilobits per second, I'm not sure I can tell the difference. What do you think about that?
That sounds pretty good. Yeah. A friend of mine, a friend of mine who's an archivist, we sometimes talk about the different settings, and he's found at 320 AAC, It's really close. Depending on the material you're trying to archive, he says it's not bad. As you pointed out, it's very difficult to know the difference. And you will hear stuff. I think the chat room was talking about something 64 kilobits. It'll take an audio file past that to hear it. Not necessarily. Depending on the music and how it was recorded, you'll hear stuff at 128 or 96 as well.
Yes, but so much of this, here we are talking about, well, can you tell the difference at this bit rate or that bit rate? Or a lot of this is it's learned, not learned response, but it's learned discernment. Like okay, I like red wines, but I'm no expert. I mean, I'm not sure I can tell you the difference between a Shiraz and a Malbec wine, and I couldn't tell you a good Malbec and a bad Malbec. If it tastes good to me, it tastes good to me, and I can't really write a review or a description. Oh, it has notes of hummus, or it has bits of fruit, fruity. It has a bit of a pear overtone. I don't know that stuff. And I've tried a little bit, and I'm not trained. I don't discern that. But what are we experts in here? All three of us. We're experts in how does audio sound. And I would say that the three of us can hear pretty slight distortions in audio, whether it's an analog type distortion like a clipping or a crossover distortion, or whether it's some kind of a digital distortion that might result from something being out of whack with a bit rate or an SRC or digital clipping. Or we can also, we've been over the years, we've learned to discern psychoacoustic distortions. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And, I can guarantee you, if you were to play me source material on 128K MP3, I could tell you what the MP3 was. Guarantee it.
Yeah. So, okay. So,
right. Go ahead.
If people are saying in the chat room that, hey, you got to be an audiophile to tell it over 64 kilobits. Well, okay, true. How much of an audiophile? I've told the story here before that one time my daughter was playing a song out of her cell phone in the backseat of the car, and it sounded horrible. Madeline, what are you listening to? Oh, it's a song I got. It's really cool. Okay, where'd you get it? Well, I put my cell phone up to Simone's cell phone, and she played it from hers and recorded on mine. Oh my goodness, it was just awful, and yet she loved it. It was just absolutely fine with her. Didn't make a difference. And she listens with the semi-awful Apple earbuds, and I'm going, really? Oh my gosh, wow! I couldn't stand that. But I'm sure that there's wine that I like to drink that other people would go, really? You like that? Okay, fine. You can save some money then.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep. Go ahead, Chris. Tarr.
All right, we got another question here. Get Her Done wants to know, why doesn't the HD signal not reach as far as the analog FM signal?
All right. Well, who wants to tackle that one? Mr. Tobin, you've taken care of a whole bunch of HD signals. Why don't you tackle that first?
Well, let's see. The laws of physics that apply. The digital signal has a certain distance limitation built into it, only because of the power levels we have to operate at. And the analog signals... let's see. Digital, as we know, drops off. It's zeros and ones. If the recovery of the data is impossible, it just mutes off, and there is no trailing edge, if you will, or trailing audio. And analog has the propensity to trail out to the noise, and the capture is a little different. It takes a little less energy to capture an analog signal than it does digital to properly recover the data stream. But a lot of it has to do with just the signal strength, the power levels we have to operate at, co-channel interference prevention, and all the other various things. And I believe it was just decided upon at a certain point. Actually, most of the HD signals, I believe, extend past the 60 dBu or the city grade signals, which are the parameters or the rings, if you will, of signal strength that the broadcasters in respective cities or licensees use to protect each other. So once you go past that protection point that the FCC stipulates, it's all gravy. It's gravy on the food. If you can get a signal out past that, that's great. But if you try to argue the point with some other broadcaster that they're encroaching on your signal, you're past the protection point. It doesn't matter. That's where the HD signal strength is based on. So here in New York City, the HD stations in the city reach very far. They almost mimic the analog, but where they trail off or fail to continue to work properly, way beyond the license parameters for that radio station. So there's no argument that that's how it works. And,
so
in layman's terms, simplest terms.
Chris Tobin, you're saying the HD usually goes beyond what we call the city grade signal contour, but it but that doesn't mean that it goes out as far as you can typically pick a station up when you're
That's
past
correct.
that city grade. Okay.
Right, that's correct.
Mr. Tarr,
You
how
gotta
about
remember,
your station?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, well, what was the question you were asking about coverage with the HD? You
Yes.
started to ask a question and then you stopped. Okay. In my experience, I agree. It's, exactly what Chris's experiences have been. Technically, if you were to talk coverage, city grade to city grade coverage, the HD signal goes way past that. But you do have, especially in issues in crowded cities where you have the multipath effect. However, HD radio tends to do better with multipath than analog radio does. In my experience here in the Midwest, where you've got a lot of flat land and a lot of distance to go, my HD digital signals go almost as far as the analog signals go before they disappear. One of my stations with an HD goes out. It's got to be a good 50 miles in HD. If you have a decent antenna on your car. And that's about where the analog starts to go kind of crazy too, and you lose RDS and you start to get some multipath issues with the pilot and things like that. So, I think a lot of it depends on terrain because again, you're looking at 1% to 10% of the analog power on digital. So you're going to have issues with building penetration, and you are going to have issues with shadowing and things like that. But I think out in the open, the system performs very well. And the other thing I found is that there's kind of a sweet spot with broadcasting in general in those frequencies where there's kind of a curve right about 100 watts where things start really getting well. We have some Class A's running HD under 100 watts, and the coverage is horrible. But the minute you kind of hit that 100-watt mark, you'd be surprised how well it performs. So, the long and short of it is, as Chris said, it's the physics. If you're running, a 100-watt signal versus a 1,000-watt signal, the 1,000-watt signal is probably going to go farther. So the difference is that instead of with analog where you're trying to brute force the sound of static, drowning out the sound of static to a listener's ear, you need a lot more power to overcome that than digital that can pick out the bits through the static and hold a signal together farther.
All right. I think one of the biggest reasons why the questioner asked why doesn't HD go as far as your regular signal is this power thing. Up until recently, HD stations were limited to minus 20 dB, and so basically 1% of the power of the station could be allocated could be added for HD. Right? I got that number right. All right, 1% power, and that was the whole HD signal.
Oh yeah,
yeah. But now it's 10 times that. Now it can be 10% under many circumstances. So there you go. It's a lot less power. What if it was reversed? What if we were 100,000 watts of HD and whatever 10% of that, 10,000 watts of analog?
We would not hear the analog at all.
Okay, wouldn't hear the analog at all. It'd be all the noise from the stereo. Hey, is RDS dying?
No.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
No. Why? A question that came across earlier is, why is it that some stations don't seem to care about their RDS? Someone in the chat room said, hey, the station's RDS was messed up for weeks, and I called them, and they didn't seem to care about it. Whatever.
Here's the thing with RDS, it depends on what you're doing with it. Now, for example, we use RDS for traffic data. Like if you have a GPS that tells you, gives you traffic alerts, that comes over our RDS. We also do title and artist and things like that. Now, whether does the thing stick? Yeah, every so often the software that converts the audio or the information from our automation system sticks, and the RDS sticks, and the reality of it is as busy as I am, I don't know when it's not working. I like to keep an eye on it and try to do the best I can, but there's really no 100% foolproof way. The Golden Eagle kind of does it for you, but it's not real, it doesn't work real well. There's really no foolproof way to know when your RDS is has gone stupid. So, the first part of that question is in a lot of cases we try, but that's just something that's real hard to monitor and to alarm. So oftentimes that will get lost until somebody tells us that there's a problem or we discover it on our own. The second part is, I think there are some stations that do. They look at that as just kind of something else that isn't a big deal, and there aren't a lot of cars that utilize it and that sort of thing. So I think part of it is the company and the how seriously they take that. But I also think part of it is just it's a sign of the way engineering is today, where hey, if I had 6 stations and one of them has a problem with RDS, that is going to be the very last thing probably that I worry about, when things are going on. So that's certainly a possibility. Now, is RDS going away? No, I think we found some ways to really make it work for us. Again, with title and artist, and in some markets with traffic data. In fact, we're trying. There's a pilot program that we're working on. I can't really talk about it, using RDS for some things. They're pretty cool and aren't even radio related. So I think there's still a lot of life left in it.
Chris, you found the same thing in New York. I bet you do. Or do you lose any money if RDS is not on in a place like New York City?
Actually, we've only on occasion done some spot delivery or momentary script title stuff with a couple of clients. I think, as it was explained to me by a programmer once, the problem with RDS in the view of many in the programming world is if it's not available in every car, then we can't assume that it's for the masses. At least the main channel, we do a promotion, we do whatever. Hey, everybody can participate or not, but they have access. RDS, you do something specialized like that, you run the risk of alienating people who don't have access to RDS, and then they might be, in this case nowadays, a people meter carrier rather than back in the days of a diary keeper, where you could play a little. And I think that's part of what plays into it. So, doing traffic and some of the stuff we've done with the title and artist, and a few occasional who's talking now and what guest is in the studio is enough to get away with and not alienate anybody. No one's going to be like, why didn't I know about that? It's just one of those things. But I think that's what's always going to keep it at bay until every car or every device has that ability for the RDS effect. HD radio, it's built in, and I think that's part of the reason why you see a lot of people do more with the HD or try to.
So if you go HD on your station and you're going to be putting some metadata into it, that channel on the HD, so you can get some readout on HD radios, which typically do have some facility for that. Then you've done that work. You might as well put this data as you can on the RDS of the analog FM as well, right?
Oh yeah,
you've got the work done. You might as well just go that last step and get the data on.
Yeah. And generally, if you have the infrastructure for HD, you have the infrastructure to deliver that data to the RDS box wherever it may be living too.
At very minimal cost.
Right.
Yeah. RDS is so inexpensive nowadays. You can get an RDS generator for well under $1,000. It may not be dynamic. It may just put your call signs and your program type and such. Where RDS is really useful is where I guess it was invented in Europe. It must have been 20 years ago. I was in France, and we were driving around, and in a lot of countries they don't have big high power FM transmitters like we have. 50,000 watt stations, 100,000 watt stations. In other countries, and I was in France, this one network called Vibration. They had, a 1,000 watt transmitter in this village, and a 2,500 watt transmitter in that town, and a 500 watt transmitter in this town. And they were typically at a relatively low height, like on top of a water tower. I think they called them water castles. They'd have the antenna there. Well, cars there have radios with RDS, and not only do they have RDS, but they oftentimes have 2 tuners in them. So there's the one tuner that you're listening to, and the other tuner is hunting around on different channels that the RDS stream of the tuner that you're listening to is telling it are alternate frequencies. So there they use this alternate frequency thing a lot. Well, we could tell the radio in the cars, we're driving around, we could tell the radio, hey, stay on Vibration. And so we'd drive around and we'd never lose the station. Even though we would be skipping from one transmitter to another, we'd never lose the audio. There'd be a very slight blip as it switched over from one tuner to another. That's pretty cool. That's a really, really good use for the technology.
In fact, that's where it was. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. In fact, that's where it was invented, and that's one of the reasons why it was invented. Yeah,
we're going to take a quick break right now and hear from our sponsor, Chris Tarr and Chris Tobin. You guys check the chat room and figure out what we're going to answer in our remaining 20 minutes or so. This part of This Week in Radio Tech, or this episode, I should say, of This Week in Radio Tech, is brought to you by my employer, one of my employers, and that's Axia Audio, on the web at axiaaudio.com. And I want to share with you this cool new console that is now shipping. We've got a small backlog of them, but we're getting them out the door, and it's the Axia Radius console. And our advertising line on this console is throw your budget a curve. Meet Radius. It is under $6,000 US dollars list price. Everybody knows you get what you pay for, right? And sometimes you get a lot less. Well, these so-called affordable radio consoles oftentimes are missing stuff, important stuff. So check out the Radius console. That's not missing much of anything. It's got... it's fully networked, so you can plug it into an Axia network and have it talk to other studios. And that's exactly what Leo Laporte does at the Twit Network. Leo has a Radius console, an Axia Radius, in his personal studio. And with one cable, with one Cat6 cable from a gigabit port that's built into the console, he's connected to the Element console, which is the big console that our show is going through right now. So if Leo needs some audio resources that are elsewhere on the network, that are plugged into the Element console or plugged into one of the nodes in the famous high-tech basement at the new Brick Twit House, those are all available on Leo's console, just over that Cat 5e cable. And Leo can produce things on his console, and that audio is available elsewhere on the network. The Radius console has the ability to hold 4 built-in profiles, we call them. So Leo can have a profile where it's just for doing his radio show, for example, on the Premier Radio Network, or he can hit a different profile and be all set up instantly to do his show, say the Security Now show with Steve Gibson, or the Windows Weekly show with Paul Thurrott. With one button push, he can do that. And if Leo wants to make sure that any audio that he does on his console doesn't go anywhere else besides his office, he can bring up another profile so that no audio from his console goes anywhere else if he wants that to be private or just stay within his office. So the Radius console, really cool. It consists of 2 parts. The Surface that you see on the page there, if you go to the website, axiaaudio.com/radius. And then there's a rack mount portion of the console. This has all the gazintas and the gazoutas. It's got the microphone connectors and the analog inputs, and it's got an AES EBU input as well. Plus, it has GPIO logic ports for machine control or other studio peripherals. It has a built-in Ethernet switch with 6 100 base T ports for live wire devices, and it has 2 gigabit ports with small form factor pluggable connections if you need to plug in fiber, for example, to connect to the rest of the outside world. All right, there you go. It's the Radius from Axia at axiaaudio.com/radius. I would encourage you to check it out. It's about $6,000, and actually, in most parts of the world, you can probably get a bit of a discount off that from your dealer. All right, guys, let's jump right back into the Stump the Chumps. What doesn't mean we don't have an opinion. We may not get the answer right, though. Mr. Tarr, what's the next question you think we ought to take?
This one came up actually as we were talking about it. Is HD radio really HD?
Ooh. I think there's an official answer to that from the folks who run and market HD radio, and the answer is no. It's just called HD.
But what is it? What does HD stand for?
It's just HD. It's just an H and a D. We'd like. Could you argue that it stands for high definition? You could make that argument, because in some environments, the HD channel is going to sound better than the analog channel. For example, if you're in San Francisco or Seattle or Tacoma, where you have a lot of multipath. And multipath really hurts the analog channel a lot, and sometimes the station may be almost unlistenable. I've driven around in San Francisco with an HD radio in the rental car, and the analog signals on some stations were just like, really? I'm going to put up with this? No wonder people listen to AM here. But if I listened to the HD, it was, oh, It carries pretty well. There's no degradation. It's either there perfectly or it drops out. And it was there almost all the time. What's your opinion?
The HD originally was called hybrid digital. I believe was the trademark I looked up back in 2002. Is that right? 2003, something like that. Yeah.
Later on, though, they changed their tune. It started out as they're saying it was hybrid digital, but now the official word is it doesn't mean anything. It's just just a name. So, because I know some people here in the IRC are going, oh, hybrid digital, hybrid. No, it was. You're right. It was hybrid digital back in the day. And then at some point they decided to just change that. And they say now that it's a meaningless name, which I suppose cuts it. Now, if you really though, if you did listen to HD back, before the programmers got a hold of it and messed it up. For example, when I signed mine on in 2004, before we started doing multicasting, and when we started doing identical processing on the HD, it's HD radio at the 96 kilobit, with the single channel digital, with very little audio processing, sounds phenomenal. It really does. Yep. It was you'd hear the analog signal roll. The digital was breathtaking. It really sounded great. Now it's we bit reduce it and we take the bandwidth down to about 15 or 16 kilohertz, so it doesn't sound so weird when it rolls out of analog, and it does perform better in terms of noise and multipath and things like that. But in terms of audio quality, it's really not anymore a whole lot better than analog.
Mr. Tobin?
No, that's right. I agree. I think we should start calling it NRSC 5B. Leave it at that.
I'll give you a couple examples of I do think there's value in HD radio. I honestly do. Here's an example. When I got an HD radio installed in my Toyota 4Runner, one time I was in Memphis, Tennessee. And I used to live in the Memphis market. I was familiar with the stations. And there's a hip-hop station there, 97.1. And hip-hop's not my thing at all. I never engineered for that station. It was always a good-sounding station. It was well-engineered. And I was sitting in a parking lot waiting for something, and so I thought, well, I'll try this station out. So I tried out 97.1 on the analog, and it was the usual hip-hop, and it was the usual audio processing of hip-hop that is tough to do because it's got a lot of bass, and it's got a lot of high-frequency energy, too. And I was thinking, okay. I mean, even if I liked the music, I'd have a hard time listening to this. And then I punched over to their HD, and this was their HD1. So it was identical, and they weren't playing an HD2 or 3 to take away bits from it. So it was full 96 kilobits, HD1. And I got to tell you, it sounded amazingly good. The bass was not in any way affecting the modulation characteristics of the rest of the audio. The high end was just totally clear, completely crystalline clean. And I'm not saying I like the music, but I thought, this is listenable. This is really listenable. And so that was a big game changer for me with HD. Another experience that go ahead, Chris.
I was going to, as we were talking about this, somebody brought up a good question that I hear a lot. And it is, first of all, somebody is saying HD radio isn't sinking in. Another person had mentioned, well, why bother having HD radio? Here's the point. It's not about the audio quality is good, but it's the additional content, and it's going to be the data services. HD radio right now is still way in its infancy, even though it's several years old now. It's still, and especially unfortunately with the economy kind of, stalled the innovation that we really had going with HD radio. A lot of companies were spending a lot of money testing new things with HD radio, rolling it out, and that kind of stopped with the economy. I predict that's going to pick up again, just based on some of the things we've done now. Here in Milwaukee, we have got all these additional new channels now. We have got we've got AMs that are simulcasting on FMs now for a much cleaner signal. We've got a blues channel. We've got a really good classic oldies channel. So to answer that question, HD radio is sinking in. It's an evolution. It's not a revolution. It's going to take a long time, and we know that going into this. But it's not going to be just about the audio quality. It's going to be about the secondary services. We're going to be doing some really neat things with data services, and it's all the tip of the iceberg. The HD radio data is very much like Ethernet in terms of the types of things that we can deliver, almost similar to IP. With one-way delivery. So I'll get off my soapbox now, but a couple of people chimed in as we were talking about HD radio, but well, you guys seem kind of down on it. Well, when we first started it, and all it was for was high-quality audio, it really did sound good. But then we discovered, as engineers do, hey, this can do a lot of cool things. We can do a lot of other neat things with this. And so it became less about the audio and more about the other things we could do with it.
Okay. Well, that's what it's supposed to be. Offer additional offer channels between the channels, right? Is there a problem with HD radio the way that we're marketing it? If you want to listen to the comedy channel, it's on WXYZ HD2. Is that a little hard for people to deal with?
Sure. We have no idea what's going on. If you're not familiar with HD and what it's about, it's a separate radio with additional channels on it. All you'll hear is something you don't have access to unless you're lucky enough to have a car or maybe a tabletop radio you purchased or was given as a gift. Yeah, I think the marketing that's been done and basically the approach radio stations have taken over the years really fell short of the mark on many occasions. And I've talked to several folks as just an ad hoc say, hey, what if we did this, this, and this with HD? Everybody was in total agreement, except when it came time to, okay, well, who's going to pay for it? But that's the point. This unique approach will pay for itself. Nobody wanted to do it unless there was a guarantee up front. I was like, well, it doesn't work that way.
Got a couple questions about how does HD work, and that's a whole show in itself. But somebody asked, does it ride on the carrier wave or what? Actually, HD radio is transmitted as a whole group of low power carriers that are both above and below the frequency and the modulation. Missing the right word here. The modulation envelope, not quite. The modulation mask of an FM carrier. So above and below that area where the analog audio goes is where all these little digital carriers are, and they're fairly redundant in the above and below, so that you can have different forms of multipath and likely still have enough data to reconstruct an HD1, an HD2, an HD3 signal, which are carried as one package. So it's additional carriers. There are some interesting technical tricks in getting an older transmitter to play nice with a new transmitter to combine these two signals together. There's different technologies for you could have a single transmitter, for example, that makes all these different signals, the FM analog and the HD, or you can have separate transmitters that combine them either on the ground, or there's even antennas that have two inputs to the antenna up on the tower. You have the analog input and the digital input. It's even possible to have two different antennas, an antenna putting out the analog signal and another antenna just below that putting out the digital signal, typically just below it. So there's different ways to get it done, but it is separate. You can lose the analog and you'd still have the digital carriers if you were doing separate amplification, and vice versa also. You could lose the digital and still keep the analog on the air too. Will it ever just catch on totally? I don't know, but hey, back in 1963, did we think FM was going to catch on totally? There were FM stations that the most they could economically see their way to do was to put an LP record changer over in the corner and just put on a stack of albums and let them play. And every time the tone arm would come back, it would hit a switch that would play an ID and then play the next album. That was the economic reality of FM radio, 40 years ago. What's our next question, Chris? Or Chris?
Actually, there's a lot of the whole just people talking about HD. Is there HD radio in Canada? I don't know. Is there? I think that we started to see some, but I'm not certain.
I don't know. I know there's HD radio in several other countries, Brazil. Oh gosh, they're not coming to mind right now. But in some other countries, they've approved. They have DAB and just recently DAB plus. By the way, somebody in the chat room a while ago said digital radio is awful in the UK. And I think I can tell you why. It's because they locked themselves into MPEG layer 2 for the audio compression algorithm, and they they have only so much bit rate. And back when they approved this, they were going to run MPEG Layer 2 at 256 kilobits per second, which is where its MPEG Layer 2 is meant to play. But to fit more channels in, they decreased the bit rate, but they had to keep the audio algorithm the same. So now they're playing MPEG Layer 2 in stereo at 128 kilobits per second, or I hear less than that. And so that's not going to sound good. But DAB Plus lets you use other algorithms. And so certainly you can play something like HEAAC V2, which Greg Oganowski discussed on our show some months ago about what a great algorithm this is, and that no, it's not the kind of algorithm that you would use for contribution quality, but for transmission quality, for entertainment purposes to the end user. Hey, 56 kilobits per second, even 48 kilobits per second with HEAAC V2 sounds just great. And I don't know if you want to hear the Boston Pops on it every day, but you sure can listen to Lady Gaga, and it'll sound like Lady Gaga.
Cow Has a Gun asks, can I get the DJ sound in a consumer product for PC voice chat? Which is an interesting question. I don't know if anybody's know that, but it is a good question. Have you guys seen anything like that?
No, I haven't. No.
I think maybe the only thing you could do is maybe if you use the line in for your microphone and got some software audio processing, Sound Solutions, something like that, would probably work for that. So that would be something. Somebody also pointed out that there is no HD radio in Canada. So there was the answer to that one. Somebody also mentioned you can use, Eric Adler mentioned that you can probably use Stereo Tool and a virtual sound card. So there you go. That's a little geek advice for you for getting that done. Another question: can you do video with HD radio?
Well, there's enough bit rate there to do some kind of some slow video, or certainly still images.
Yeah, I recall there was a test where they were doing still images on HD, and that worked out pretty well, just doing pictures on there. I can't imagine that there's enough bandwidth to do anything more than that.
I think the answer depends on how bad you want the video to look, right?
That's exactly it, because it's a really slow, the bit rate is just not nearly fast enough to support that.
Yeah. You can get a grand total of 122 kilobits per second out of the entire HB spectra, the allocation. If for a while there it was you had to apply to the FCC for some special permission and get the Ubiquity folks to help you out. But I think more stations are doing that now. But there's a little bit more area that they could go out to get 122 kilobits per second.
I believe is an MP3 mode, and you actually turn on additional OFDM carriers closer in to the to your analog audio area. So you do have there's potential there for some encroachment, and I think the magic number there is anything over 110% modulation will cause errors in the digital, which of course none of us ever do 110% modulation ever. Right, Chris?
No, 108, 108, 05, 108 maybe.
Yeah, never, ever, ever do anything like that. But yeah, you can do that. Now, on the other hand, if you turn off the analog signal, for somebody who'd be very daring, you have a whole boatload of data. Then I don't remember what the standard is, but if you replace your analog with nothing but digital carriers. Now, that's a whole lot of bandwidth if you want to be the pioneer that happens.
And actually, in the chat room, Radio-Controlled Wife asked about this. She says, I thought it was supposed to have 8. Most I've ever seen is 4. Well, yeah, you turn off the analog, and you have room then for 8. Is anybody doing this? Not that I know of. Because you would lose every analog listener that you ever had, because you'd be all digital at that point. But you could do 8. And someday we may be there. If broadcasting as we have now continues to be a good model, who knows? Someday, the internet distribution and availability may be so fantastic, or then again, it may just our usage of it may expand right along with the availability of it. We'll just never have enough bandwidth for everybody to reliably get audio and video and lots of interactivity that way.
I mean, that's the thing is, I mean, with technologies like HD radio, okay, hopefully it works out. It's, it's a good technology. It seems to be working well. It's fairly flexible. It may not work out, but I think the bigger thing is that we're trying these things, and we're doing some research and some development into, quite frankly, a technology that, although is very, very old, one of the original broadband technologies, is still very viable today. And, do we need to be doing these innovations? Well, not really. I mean, radio is still very viable today. Radio listenership is as high as it's ever been. But I think these technologies, especially as engineers, get us thinking outside of the box and thinking of new ways to serve listeners and carry us into the future. Will some of these things not work? I mean, AM stereo is a great example of something that was a great idea but just never panned out. Well, who knows? But at least we're trying these things, and I think that's what's important.
Hey, back in the 70s, didn't some of us try quad? Well, okay, I wasn't old enough then.
They kind of have that now with HD. You can do surround sound with HD radio.
Well, yeah, and actually, someone asked, can radio do surround sound? And I'll take really as short as I can here, maybe a minute and a half to try to explain this, because there was just a blurb in the news today that the Atlanta Braves have made a deal with Cumulus Broadcasting to transmit the Braves games in surround sound, which would be kind of interesting for crowd noise, and maybe the crack of the. I don't know how there's a lot of issues of how do we mix for surround so it sounds realistic, and usually there's just some kind of fill noise behind you. But anyway, there's two basic ways to transmit surround sound over existing facilities, and one of these ways was a way that Telos, my employer, was promoting for several years, and we still highly believe in it. And the other way is a way where you somehow you've got to embed all the surround material somehow and transmit it. Remembering that if you have a surround mix, say a 5.1 surround mix, and you have a stereo mix, well, everything that's in that surround mix is in the stereo mix. It all exists there. So what we try to do is figure out a way to take that surround information, put it in the stereo information, and at the other end, if there's the capability there, we break that surround information back out and send it to the correct speakers. One way to do that is kind of a smoke and mirrors way, but I'm sure the proponents of it would say that, well, no, it's much more sophisticated than smoke and mirrors. But this is to embed the steering information into the stereo signal. And this usually works reasonably well. There are some circumstances in which it doesn't work, especially with mono-compatibility. But there are some examples of a couple of these different technologies that don't work so well. But the good news is that these methods, such as proposed and promoted by, I believe, Neural and DTS, these methods work with existing infrastructure. So they're quite convenient to use. If you have a stereo plant, well, of course, then you encode the 5.1 into your stereo plant, you mix it, you move it around as stereo, it comes out the other end, and if you have the right equipment, you can decode it in 5.1. The other way to do this is the method that is promoted by Fraunhofer, in which you still take the 5.1 audio and you mix it down to stereo, but there is a side chain of data. And Fraunhofer's gotten this down to 6 kilobits per second. It's basically steering data. And there's also cues in the steering data so that it doesn't necessarily have to be perfectly aligned with the audio itself. And then you can still mix and audio process and do everything in stereo that you would normally do with the stereo mix down. But at the other end, but you do have to transmit the 6 kilobit data stream. So there's been experimentation on the air with HD radio to transmit stereo audio. And by the way, it could be the analog audio, or it could be the HD stereo audio, to transmit that audio and also recover the 6 kilobit per second data stream, and then use that steering data in that data stream to properly and fully recover the 5.1 information, so you have full separation between any two outputs or speakers in the whole system. Whereas systems that rely on embedding that information in the audio totally, watermarking it, if you will, there are some ways that you get a lot less separation between the speakers. So that's the short course on it. I got to tell you, my employer Telos, we have been promoting this for several years at the NAB show, and we got almost zero interest from radio stations, and it just totally befuddles us why radio stations would not be interested in doing this. One station, WZLX in Boston, did a lot of experimentation with us, and they may still be running a surround stream on the internet. I'm not sure if they are or not, but anyway, that's the stories on surround. Yep, it can do it. There's some cool technologies that make it possible. Some may be better than others, but they're all very implementable with equipment available today. But there are no receivers.
Fantastic. I want to hear Justin Bieber in surround sound.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Okay. Anything else quick? We probably got to wrap it up and go.
Just real quick. Where was it now? How much compression do you what's an acceptable compression? If you're talking about audio reduction, I would say at least 60 or 70 dB of compression is acceptable.
All right.
That'll be very flat sound.
That's really tough to answer because I feel pretty strongly about this. You can buy audio compressors, software, hardware that really basically just do the math. I mean, they're just doing the math without strong regard to how does this sound. And the two major audio processing manufacturers on the market, I'm talking about Orban and Omnia, Omnia being my employer, these people have done an enormous amount of psychoacoustic research, and they really get how to do a lot of processing. And if you want to have it not sound so processed, if you want to adjust it that way, you can still be very loud and use the channel of transmission very well and have it still sound very, very good, because those two companies have just an enormous amount of research into that. If you're using the compressor that's built into, I'll use an old product, Cool Edit Pro, well, you do a lot of compression with that, they're not going to sound good because it's just math without regard to the psychoacoustic effects.
In fact, it's the old Optimod 8100s have a very defined sweet spot at 10 dB of gain reduction. So keep that in mind. And I always, my to this day, my MO has always been more of an addition by subtraction, and sometimes less is more. So I think a lot of times you get a lot more loudness and punch out of 10 dB of gain reduction than you will out of 20.
Well, Mr. Tobin, I've always thought that you can't hear loud unless you also have soft to compare it to.
This is true. This is true.
So if you got a big old wall of sound, eventually you're just going to turn it down, and it's not going to be so much. Hey, I think we need to. We had a little contest going on again this week. Last week, Justin Emery from the UK won our contest and received a free copy of Omnia AXE, which is audio software that I wouldn't say does it all, but Omnia AXE does your audio processing and generates a stream for you. So if you're a live broadcaster on the internet, it's exactly what you need. It's very cool. And I want to I want to choose a winner this week from the folks who tweeted about This Week in Radio Tech being on the Twit network, and I'm gonna as best as I can pick randomly. I got them all on the screen here, and this is totally unscientific, right? Probably not even fair. But this week we're going to give the Omnia AXE. The winner is Eric Adler. Eric, you're the winner of an Omnia AXE, and we'll be in touch with you in the next tonight or tomorrow about getting you that license for Omnia AXE. Thank you to everyone who retweeted about us being on the Twit network right now. We sure appreciate it very much. And congratulations again to Eric Adler. All right, guys, let's wrap it up. Chris Tarr from Mukwonago, Wisconsin, thank you for being with us and sharing a bit of your expertise with us.
Thanks for having me.
And Chris Tobin, the best-dressed engineer in radio from Manhattan, New York.
Oh, yeah, yes.
Well,
thank you.
We'll look forward to talking to both of you guys next week. Maybe Tom Ray will be back with us. He's stuck in bad weather and traffic in New York. Maybe he should just go ahead and move to the city, Chris, like you. All right. Thanks again to Axia and the Axia Radius console for sponsoring our show. And thank you to Alex for switching the show quite commendably. We sure appreciate it. You guys have a great night, and we'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye.